My family blocked me for being black. Now they're crying after I became rich and famous. There was always a strange stillness in the air when I walked into the room, like I was an echo that didn't belong to the conversation, a misplaced shadow among warm lights. My skin, deep and unapologetic in its melanin, never fit against the backdrop of their pastel family portraits and pearl-draped holidays. I remember being 10, maybe younger, when I first noticed the shift, not in the words, but in the silence that settled right after I spoke, the kind that fills space like smoke, choking off the room's air before anyone admits there's fire. My cousins got praised for the most basic things. When Marcus passed geometry with a C-, my aunt brought out a cake. When Alana joined cheerleading, the whole family came to her regional competition. Me? I brought home trophies, debating championships, art installations that won state. They'd glance over, lips pursed, eyes skimming past me as if I were a stranger briefly occupying a shared photograph. "Don't be freak," my uncle once muttered when I tried to show him a feature written about me in the school paper. No one likes arrogance. It was never what they said. It was what they didn't. At first, I thought I could change it. I softened my tone, straightened my hair, laughed at the jokes that jabbed at my heritage with the subtle grace of a slap. I wore their colors. I took their advice. I tried to fit into spaces that were never carved for me. But trying to shrink myself didn't make them love me more. It just made me disappear. They'd talk about trips I wasn't invited to, smile in photos I never knew were being taken, post statuses about family unity, while quietly scrubbing me from the tree. I confronted it once, just once. Thanksgiving, 2 years before everything changed. I asked why my name was never included when they toasted to accomplishments, why I was never in the slideshow of family memories they projected onto the living room wall, why my hair, my voice, my friends were always the butt of a joke whispered just loud enough for me to hear. The room turned cold, brittle. My aunt clicked her tongue and said, "You're just too sensitive." My cousin shook her head like I'd embarrassed them all. "Why are you always so angry?" That night, I was quietly removed from the group chat. A few days later, I noticed I'd been unfriended, blocked, erased. But they did me a favor. Grief can turn into gasoline if you let it burn right. I stopped begging to belong. I stopped editing myself for people who didn't read me in the first place. I picked up every shard of rejection, every passive-aggressive comment, every door shut in my face, and I forged something unbreakable. I buried myself in my art, in the pulse of late-night rhythm and the silence of early morning grind. While they were busy curating perfect holiday cards, I was bleeding onto canvases, recording verses from the hollow of my gut, writing monologues sharp enough to cut glass. The internet noticed first, then producers, then agents, then the world. Suddenly, I was everywhere they could not escape. My voice rang out from the stages of award shows they only watched on TV. My face lit up screens they scrolled through with forced smiles and racing hearts. Interviews where I told my story, the real one, the raw one, without softening its edges to make it palatable. I didn't name them. I didn't need to. The ones who needed to know, knew. Then the messages began to trickle in. "Hey, long time. Your aunt's been talking about you nonstop. Can we catch up sometime? I've been following your work. So proud of you. We were just raised a certain way, you know? Don't take it personal. Family is family. Let's put the past behind us." I didn't respond, not because I was bitter, not because I wanted revenge, because I had finally found peace in the absence of their noise. They wanted access, not connection. They saw a spotlight and thought they could slip into it through the back door. But I had already changed the locks. My story wasn't their souvenir. My success wasn't a bandage for their discomfort. I imagined them, gathered around their coffee table, flipping through the glossy magazine that bore my name in gold serif. I was wearing my natural hair in that cover photo, coiled and defiant, with skin glowing under the kind of light that loves you back. The headline read, "Voice of a Generation." I wasn't smiling to be polite. I was smiling because I had built something eternal from the ruins they left me in. They used to block me for being too much. Now, I block them for being too late. And somewhere in the stillness of their living room, While the rain taps at their window and the television murmurs praise they can't escape, I know they're thinking the same thing. They could have had me, but instead they chose to pretend I wasn't there. They don't talk about the silence after exile, the kind that hums just beneath your skin, too loud to ignore, too persistent to tune out. After they blocked me, unfriended me, reshaped their world to exist without me, I walked around like an uninvited ghost, hovering in the corners of memories I was never allowed to claim. For a while, it stung. Of course it did. Rejection wrapped in family packaging cuts deeper, because you expect safety from the ones who share your blood. You expect shelter, not surveillance, love, not conditions. But eventually, silence became sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, I became dangerous. The very thing they tried to kill in me, my voice, grew teeth. I stopped speaking in whispers, stopped dressing my rage in ribbons and calling it resilience. I created freely, without asking if it was too loud, too proud, too much for their brittle sensibilities. I stopped cropping my brilliance to fit inside their dim expectations. My pain became paint. My story became script. My defiance? It was the thread I used to stitch my broken self back into something unrecognizable. I remember the first time I walked into the studio that would later produce my breakout project. There was dust in the corners, wires hanging like neglected veins, and a scent of potential in the air. Faint, electric, urgent. I rented it with 3 months' savings and a prayer. The walls were cracked, but so was I, and we mended each other. I spent nights there until dawn, recording spoken word pieces that bled truth like open wounds. No filters, no edits for comfort, just raw memory, rhythm, and heat. The night my first video went viral, I was barefoot on that studio floor, eating instant noodles and rereading hate comments that still lingered in old emails. Too dark. Too political. You'd be prettier if... That kind of venom has a rhythm, a cadence that becomes so familiar it almost seduces you into silence. But not this time. Not ever again. Within hours, the views climbed into 6 figures. By the end of the week, my inbox overflowed. Invitations, collaborations, media outlets that once ignored me now fought for an exclusive. And while they, my family, sat in their curated lives, trying to keep up with their carefully balanced facades, the world was learning my name. Not the name they used like an afterthought, but the full one, carved with history and strength, amplified in echoing arenas and digital waves. Still, the messages came. More now. Desperate. Masked in politeness. Drenched in familiarity they hadn't earned. Hey, Star! Don't forget your roots. You should come to the next family reunion. Your uncle wants to make amends. I always knew you'd make it. We're so proud. Pride? They once refused to even share my college acceptance letter on the family group page because it wasn't Ivy League. When I got into UCLA on a full scholarship for creative writing, they said, "That's not a real degree." But now, with cameras chasing my steps and articles praising my prose, suddenly it was prestigious. Now it was enough. I didn't reply. But I read every message like a forensic analyst, searching for the moment where guilt tried to wear love like a mask. I found none. Only opportunism stitched in faux concern, insincerity dripping between the lines. They weren't proud of me. They were embarrassed by their misjudgment and afraid of their erasure from a legacy they didn't believe in until it paid. Meanwhile, I continued to build. My team expanded. My brand grew. The stories I told, the poems, the documentaries, the art exhibitions, were no longer just for me. They became mirrors for people who, like me, had been left out of family trees but still bloomed defiantly in soil that rejected them. I spoke in schools, mentored youth, gave interviews where I didn't hide behind politeness. I talked about colorism, internalized prejudice, the wounds inflicted within families who pretend that jokes don't bruise. I never said their names, but their sins were loud enough for recognition. The backlash came, of course. It always does. There were think pieces, old relatives accusing me of airing dirty laundry. One even posted a photo of us from a birthday party when I was 9, claiming we were always close. I remembered that day. I remember crying in the bathroom because a cousin told me my skin looked like burnt toast, and everyone laughed. They posted nostalgia. I carried scars. I didn't respond to that either. Not publicly. I just kept rising. One morning, while preparing for a televised panel on cultural identity, I received a voicemail. My mother's voice, trembling, unfamiliar in its humility. She hadn't called in years, not since the fallout, not since her silence became a louder betrayal than anything she ever said. She didn't apologize, not directly, but the quiver in her breath carried the weight of regret. "You don't have to talk to me," she said, "but I want you to know. I saw your interview. I cried." Then she hung up. I sat there for a long time, not moved, not vindicated, just still. I didn't hate her. I didn't love her either, not in the way love is usually framed. What I felt was deeper, murkier, a sort of grief for the mother I never had, the mother who chose silence over solidarity. And now, as the world screamed my name in celebration, she whispered hers in shame. I thought about answering. I really did. But I also remembered every time she called me too dramatic when I expressed pain, every moment she smiled when others mocked me, every time she looked the other way when I needed her eyes on me the most. So instead, I walked on stage. That panel would be viewed by millions, and in that moment, I spoke not to them, but to every girl who had been blocked, dismissed, or dimmed by those who claimed to love her. I didn't speak of revenge. I spoke of revolution. The quiet, patient, deliberate kind that starts when you realize you don't need permission to shine. Somewhere, maybe in her kitchen, maybe alone in her car, my mother listened. But she, like the rest, would only get to witness this version of me from afar. A face on a billboard, a voice in a documentary, a name they once ignored now etched into culture. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of day that pretends to be peaceful, sky clear, sun lazy, the wind whispering through open windows. I was home. Not the one they knew. Not the house with the creaky stairs and portraits that always left me out. No. This was mine. A place stitched together from years of silence turned into strategy, from pain transformed into purpose. The walls held more than art. They held freedom. And on that quiet morning, as the city exhaled around me, I realized I didn't carry the weight anymore. It was gone, all of it, the resentment, the ache, the need to be seen by those who had refused to look. I had just returned from a European speaking tour, 3 weeks of back-to-back panels, gallery showings, and standing ovations. My name had been lit up across buildings, scrawled across books, whispered by strangers in adoration. Every place I had once felt invisible, I now entered as a presence too vast to be ignored. They, my old family, had become background noise to a life they could never claim again. And then, as if summoned by some final echo of the past, the letter arrived. No envelope, no return address. Just a simple, hand-folded note slid under my door, as if the sender couldn't bear to face the version of me I had become. The handwriting was familiar. My grandmother's, shaky but unmistakable. The same cursive that once labeled jars in the pantry, that wrote my name only when sending holiday cards to everyone else first. It was short. "We made mistakes, but I hope one day you'll remember the good too. We're proud, even if we didn't say it then." There was no plea for reunion, no request for forgiveness, just a soft, almost trembling acknowledgement that they knew, that they had known all along. I folded the note and set it on the table beside my latest award, an abstract golden sculpture gifted at the Legacy Gala, where I had delivered a speech that left the room breathless. I didn't cry, not out of coldness, but because the moment didn't belong to grief anymore. It belonged to closure, the final page of a chapter long overstayed in memory. That week, a major magazine ran a profile piece on me titled "From Shadow to Spotlight, The Rise of a Cultural Architect." The cover photo was unlike anything they'd ever seen of me. I stood in front of a mural I had painted, brown skin glowing under painted fire, hair wild and natural, eyes unflinching, not smiling, not softening, just being. It was the culmination of every whispered no, every turned back, every smirk disguised as concern. I didn't attend the next family reunion, but I saw it online. Photos uploaded in real time, smiling faces, picnic tables, fireworks above their small-town skyline. For the first time, they'd placed my face among the decorations. a poster-sized magazine cover on display near the buffet table, surrounded by dollar store streamers and too much potato salad. My aunt wore a t-shirt with my quote across the chest. "I don't need permission to exist in full color." I didn't laugh. I didn't fume. I simply watched for a moment, then closed the app. They could have had me in real time, could have loved me before the world taught them how. But now they only had my reflection, framed in success they couldn't touch. They tried to stitch themselves into a legacy they had once cut me out of. But history doesn't forget the author. That fall, I launched a foundation, a space for artists of color who had been silenced within their own homes, a sanctuary for voices that had been called too loud, too raw, too different. We named it The Unmuted Room. And when I stood on stage at its opening, flanked by young creators who now called me mentor, I felt the full gravity of the distance I had traveled, not just from rejection to recognition, but from desperation to dominion. In the crowd that night, I spotted her, my mother, alone at the back of the room, standing just inside the doorway like someone unsure if they were welcome. She looked older than I remembered, shoulders hunched, eyes flickering between pride and apology. She didn't come forward, didn't try to make a scene. She just watched, listened. And when my speech ended, she turned and walked away. That was enough. I never heard from her again. Years passed. The fame stayed, but it changed shape. I wasn't the new voice anymore. I was the institution, the figure they invited to pass the torch. My work outlived trends, became curriculum, echoed in universities and city murals. Interviews slowed, but impact deepened. I traveled, taught, wrote stories they tried to erase. My name became legend, and through it all I never looked back, not out of vengeance, but because there was nothing left behind me worth reaching for. One winter, I returned to my hometown, not for them, but for me. I walked through the streets where I used to dream myself into existence, the park where I wrote my first poem, the corner store where they used to follow me down the aisles. I visited the graveyard too. My grandmother had passed, a small, unremarkable headstone. I stood over it for an hour, said nothing, just let the wind speak for me. Then I left. No tears, no speeches, just peace. The story didn't end with some teary reunion or dramatic apology. It ended exactly how it needed to. Me, whole, loud, untamed, standing in the life I built without the people who told me I never could. They blocked me once, hoping I'd vanish. But I didn't vanish. I became undeniable. And now the only version of me they'll ever know is the one they can't reach, the one shining from magazine covers, the one who rewrote the family tree and left them out, the one who finally stopped waiting for the door to open and built an empire where none of them had a key.